This is Mike. I'm back for our last video of this four-part series, just talking a little bit about things that my advice for PAs, nurse practitioners who are interested in starting their own practice. Now, last time I went back and looked at that tape, and there was something I was forgetting. I want to talk about one more issue that was very important to our startup. Now, before I talk about that issue, I want to make it clear that it was 2 weeks ago, yesterday, that I closed my practice after 5 years. Now, I'm very happy that I did this. I think we were very successful. We saw 2,500 patients from throughout the Pacific Northwest, from Montana, Idaho, all over British Columbia, Alaska. My entrepreneurship was successful in marketing our practice in the light of some very hard circumstances. For example, all the regional hospitals had their own neurology groups, and they put out things to the referring physician not to refer to us. We were independent. We're the only independent group, except for my old neurology group, and they did not have a headache specialist. So we had a lot of challenges, but we were full from the day that we started to the end, and our patients were very happy. And I'm going to talk about one thing that is very rewarding to me. It was about 2 years ago, we did a survey of our patients and their satisfaction, and there's been several headache clinics who've done this, and we presented this data at the International Headache Congress that year. And in our data, 97% of our patients, and this was a non-biased survey, said it was the best headache care they've ever received in their life. And almost all of them have gone to neurologists, they've gone to other headache clinics, so we were proud of that accomplishment. Now, also about 85% said they were extremely satisfied. Now, the difference probably between the 85 and the 97% are those who just didn't get better, like any clinic has, so they can say it's the best care they ever had, but they still weren't satisfied. So that explains that. So I'm proud that we had the best statistics ever reported in the world by a headache clinic, and it's one started and owned by a PA. And we have a lot of very happy patients, and we were able to see many of them do much better, and for that I'm very happy and grateful. Now, last time I was going to talk about one more problem in the startup. So, and I thought about that as soon as I turned the tape off. The last problem in the startup, I mentioned this game. I think it's called Jenga, Jenga, and I think it's not Spanish. I think you pronounce the J, Jenga, where you stack these wooden blocks. My kids play it. So, any business, but a medical practice also has to have certain blocks as the foundation, and if they're not in order, the whole thing will collapse. This last issue, and I've already talked about several hard ones, this last issue wasn't a full block, but it was a half a block. So we were teetering from the beginning. And there's several times along the way that if things had been just a little bit different, I'm sure I would have stayed in practice until the end. Now, I didn't have to close. We weren't going bankrupt. But for me personally, I've done this for 5 years, and the amount of work that required for me to do, and I'm talking going in every morning about 6:30, working until 6 o'clock at night, going in every Saturday, every Sunday, but worse than that, having to sit at home after I get home and work on billing issues and working on testing new EHRs or new practice management systems, dealing with taxes, business stuff. I mean, it ended up consuming my life. And if I made $200,000 a year, it might have been worth it. I could start paying people to mow my yard and things like that. But unfortunately, due to the problems I talked about with insurance reimbursement, is really tough these days. That I was the low end of scales for PA payment, and the only reason, or PA compensation. But the reason I stayed in as long as I did, I really enjoyed doing what I'm doing. I was my own boss. I had a wonderful supervising physician who was very supportive. Now, he didn't do any of the business work, and that was the plan from the beginning. But he was extremely supportive, and I'm happy about that. So let me get to this other startup issue. Then I'm going to summarize our years in practice, and try to boil it down to what my strong advice is for anyone who's considering doing this. So, in our area, I was talking about credentialing with insurance companies, and I was throwing one more curveball that was, I know that the day I heard it, I was pretty devastated, and everyone said, oh, it's not a big deal, not a big deal. It was a big deal, and it's about sank our ship. And that is, our #1 insurance company in our region is Group Health HMO. Now, my prior practice, that made up 40% alone of my patients. Not only do they represent the largest group of patients, they also represent the highest paying insurance company. So I got a letter from them at the stroke of midnight when I became practice owner. They refused to do business with me. Now this was tough, and I never saw that coming, although when I started credentialing with the insurance company, I was nervous. I knew this could happen with one or two of them, but this was a pretty devastating blow. Now, I am 100% confident in my mind in how this worked, that they did not do business with me because I was a PA who owned the practice, because I was their #1 headache provider for 8 years until the day I became owner, and then like that, they did not need my services anymore. Now, I talked to my PA mentor about this when it happened, and he said, oh, that if it ever happened to him, he'd see him in court. I'm sorry. That's another one of those fantasies. It just doesn't work out. I actually did meet with lawyers and talk to them about it. And number one, they said we had to have a smoking gun. And a smoking gun would have to be a letter written to me saying, we will not do business with you because you are a PA and you are an owner. And if we had the smoking gun and $100,000, we could probably take them to court. And if we won, we could probably force them to contract with us. I'd still be without $100,000. So you see, first of all, I did not have the smoking gun, and I did not have the $100,000 to do that. But I did get very entangled in a hard fight for 2 years. I mean, I went down to their executive building and met with their vice president. I argued with them. I sent letters. I wrote to all the PAs who are employed by Group Health HMO. Now, not only was that a problem, because at the stroke of midnight, we had 500 patients that were like that cut off. And they were devastated. They had no one else that could help them. They called our office every day in tears. They didn't know where to go. They didn't know what to do. And there's nothing that we could do. And it wasn't long before I decided, you know, I'm tired of taking responsibility for other people's decisions. And I made it clear to them, call your insurance company. I did not make this decision. Do not get angry at me. Get angry at your insurance company. You're the one that buys the premium. It's your insurance company. You call them up and you complain. And a lot of them did. A lot of them wrote to congressmen. A lot of them wrote to the insurance commissioner of the state of Washington. I was very grateful for that support. None of it was enough with Group Health. Now I'm going to say one more thing about this story, because they really were they were somewhat the death knell at the end too, because about 2 years ago, out of the blue, I got a letter from Group Health saying, guess what, we're now going to do business with you. I was elated. I called my old practice, because they have HMOs, PPOs, they have like 12 different systems. And I wanted to make sure this was the same system I had been in before, where I could see their patients pretty easily. You can get nothing from their website, nothing from their information that they send out. It's just, they just hold their deck close to their hand. And so my office manager, my old practice, made a mistake. She told me that, yes, PPO was what I was under before. So when they told me we're going to be under PPO, I thought, wow, all of a sudden our demand is going to double. Our productivity is going to double, more than double, because they pay for one visit that Medicare would pay $45 for, they would pay $135 for. So it's a huge difference. So as I'm someone that's always thinking ahead and planning, and I started planning about this, and we had a crappy EHR system, which is okay, it was free, but I knew we'd have to get a better one to do our billing and to do our office management and to do our EHR. So I started planning on this, and I test drove, I bet I spent at least 80 hours test driving these different systems. So we came down to one that we ended up signing a contract with. And this is a very important lesson, and this would apply to any business, but especially medical practice, is that every vendor that approaches you about a software or any other kind of service, they will disappoint you profoundly. None of them live up to what they claim. At least that's been my experience. You may have a different experience with a different vendor. But this software system was really a disaster for our practice. It was so complex, and it would break down, and my productivity went down rather than going up. And our biller's productivity went way down. She went from 20 hours a week to 38 hours a week trying to just manage the software, and they had problem after problem. It would not bill any of the Medicaid insurances properly, so none of those got paid. It could not bill secondary insurances, so we lost tens of thousands of dollars. Now, I may end up in a lawsuit with them when I get back, but it was a very frustrating battle, and I regret deeply ever getting into a contract with them. And I have 10 months left on this contract, and they're demanding I pay cash right now, and I may end up taking them to court. But here's the other problem is that after sending this letter to us, Group Health, they never honored the claim. We never were credentialed with them. They, we started seeing patients left and right and submitting bills, even though they said we were now part of their system. They denied all payments, saying that we were not part of their system. And you couldn't argue with them. You couldn't even talk to them. You say, I have a letter saying we're part of your system. How come you're not paying this bill? And you're saying you're not part of the system. And they're saying simply, we don't find you in the computer directory. So, there's another big battle that I'm involved with. So this is the reason I decided after 5 years that I'm just really done with this. And, of all the issues that I dealt with, 80% of them were health insurance related. They are hard to deal with. And that's why, you don't have to do it this way. But if it's all possible, I would suggest being small and not doing business with health insurance companies, being cash only. Now, I want to start to summarize this a little bit. So I was thinking that you break this down, I'd say the challenges of being a nurse practitioner, PA, owner of a small or of a practice. There's 4 avenues, four issues, 4 challenges. Number 1, I call it the business challenge. Everybody that starts a small business goes through this first one. And that is getting financing, getting small business administration backing. If you can avoid that, do it. Get financed by your family or your own bank account. Then there's these unknowns, and I threw out these stories about the landlord. We didn't have a good landlord. Great building, not a good landlord. But there was no way to see that coming. There was no references that people would say that they were not a good landlord. But the mailbox problem was huge for us. But the point I'm trying to make, there's going to be a lot of unknowns about any business. Like I said, I actually knew of a business patient of mine who had a business that there really was a toxic dump under his building that he bought. And he was in court for years over that, and he was a nervous wreck about it. So that's just the way business is. Now, the other thing about business, when you do your business plan, it's really easy to, like I've said several times, to overestimate or underestimate your expenses. Now, here's some expenses you got to think about. You got to pay city tax on your revenue. Most places, you got to pay state tax. Washington State doesn't have an income tax, but they do have a similar tax based on revenue. It's a revenue tax. Then you got to pay payroll tax, which is very easy to forget about, and that's pretty substantial. That was huge. I paid probably $8,000 a month in just payroll taxes. So there's a lot of those expenses that any business would face. So that's just being a business. Now, the second challenge is being a medical practice. Now, if I was a brand new physician coming out of school to start a medical practice, he or she's going to have a lot of problems anyway. And right now, the climate is very difficult to succeed based on the Affordable Care Act and the way insurance are posturing themselves to fight you and to fight hard not to pay you. Previously, people who do procedures have gotten by. Even in headache work, we do a fair amount of procedures, and those were always paid, but now none of them are paid, hardly. Botox is paid, for Botox, I got $105 per treatment, but to get it prior authorized, to get the bill paid, to submit the bill and argue with them, I spent probably anywhere from $80 to $200 per patient. That makes no business sense, but that's the way the insurance companies have set it up. And that's why it's very hard to make a living as a practice like that. So now those are issues regarding business in general and medical practices, setting up a medical practice. Now, your next challenge is being a PA or nurse practitioner. Now, I wasn't naive. I've had a lot of battles with people before over my life, many battles about being a PA. But there is extreme discrimination. It still exists. I wish there could be a class action lawsuit. And there are laws, like the non-compete or not the non-compete, but the restraint of trade laws that should protect you. But again, I've talked to lawyers about this, and like with the group health, that was clearly restraint of trade, but there's very little you can do about it. So I'm going to mention just a few of these. Some I've talked about, some I have not, that as a PA that I've faced. Group health would not do business with me because I was a PA. Wells Fargo would not give me a loan because I was a PA. Now here's some others I didn't mention. I do a lot of Botox. Allergan, the makers of Botox, when I got started in my clinic, refused to sell me Botox or do business with me. That was another huge battle I got involved with. I fought that all the way up to the vice president of Allergan. I met with him at Starbucks in Phoenix to have this conversation. Nice guy, but his lawyers were totally screwed up. I mean, I talked to the lawyers of Allergan, and they said, well, nurse practitioners and PAs aren't allowed to prescribe medicines. I mean, I feel like, how can you be a lawyer and say something like that? And I would send them copies of the state bills and all this stuff, and they'd say, well, we've heard that. I mean, it just made no sense, a lawyer be talking that way. I got bored last night, and I watched the whole season of Better Call Saul. Man, I wish Saul, I don't like his criminal behavior, especially in Breaking Bad, but man, I wish I could have used an attorney like Saul. But so these are discriminatory behaviors. But finally, after I met with the vice president of Allergan and had just a conversation over a mocha and made it clear, he changed the entire policy of Allergan to now allow PAs and nurse practitioners to buy and use Botox. Now, before we could use Botox in a setting of a practice owned by a physician. So this part was the part that was new. So, and then one more of these discriminatory things that happen, and there's a lot of others. I just won't bog down with the little ones, the trivial ones, the big ones I've talked about. One other is the drug frovatriptan. When I was at Mayo Clinic, I was assigned to be an advisor to Elan, E-L-A-N, who was making frovatriptan or brought to the market. So I was involved in this drug getting to the market. This was after the research was done and they had FDA approval, but I went out to Lake Tahoe for a week and met with the executives from Elan to give them advice about how to market this drug based on its pharmacokinetics and those things. So as soon as I opened my doors, the Frova rep came over one day and said, I have orders from my office never to speak to you again or to never ever drop off samples. And I said, how can this be? Oh, a previous rep had told me a few years ago that they looked at the statistics and I was the #1 prescriber of frovatriptan west of the Mississippi, just because all I do is headache work. So that was I didn't get too involved with that fight. It was just very disappointing that here I am, their #1 customer of the drug company, at least west of the Mississippi, probably the second or third in the whole country, and they will not talk to me because I'm a PA and I own the practice, and according to their lawyers, they think that's illegal. I mean, again, it's mind-blowing. So those are the issues that you'll have to come across being a PA and nurse practitioner. And there'll be physicians who want to shut you down. I had special neurologists in our region. They try to spread rumors that we were giving poor care, which is absolutely not true. Then I had letters written by authorities in headache medicine to say, no, we were clearly the best headache providers in the region to back us up. So I think that was the summary of those things. So I'm going to just close here with just my advice. My advice I mentioned earlier is that you go small or you go large. But with going large, you have to be very cautious because there you're going to have to deal with marketing issues. And what I mean by that, you have to really know your market. If you start out hiring 3 providers, like 2 nurse practitioners or 2 PAs and a physician or 2 physicians, that's a lot of money. You're going to need $200,000 or $300,000 to open your doors, and you're going to need a lot of medical assistants, a nurse, billing department, all those things. So if you were to go large, you could have a better chance of making money if that's what you want to do, but you have to have the demand, and then you get into more and more employees, and this goes back to the item of just being a business owner. I think this is another mistake that I made, that I had this fantasy You'd have to be about as old as me to remember the movie Annie. Well, you know the story, Annie. And I forgot her name, but Mr. Warbucks, I don't know what she's called, his professional assistant or whatever she was. She was so good in that movie. She was so, she was thinking ahead, and she was reading his mind, and just a wonderful, I think he ended up marrying her in the movie or something like that. But that's the kind of thing not marrying my medical assistant, but to have someone, I want to have an office manager, someone that I could just totally depend upon. Dump all these things on, and they would get done, and I wouldn't have to worry about them at all. And that just didn't happen. And that's why if I was to do this again, I would go small, so small that I would be the sole employee, myself and a supervising physician, maybe an MA, and I would outsource all my billing to get that out of the house with a very good company. So if you go bigger, you're going to have employment issues. You're going to hire a doctor that you think is fantastic, and after a few months, you find out he's a jerk, and then you got to figure out how can I get rid of him, and then there's contractual problems. So that's the issues with a big practice. But if you have a big practice and it does work out, and you do have the market, you have the number of patients that fill all those slots, that's when you have the opportunity to make good money. Now, the middle size where I was at, because I ended up having 5 employees, it was sort of this no man's land because our expenses started going through the roof. Just before I closed the practice, I started cutting out all these services that we were using, automatic telephone reminder calls, $500 a month, billing software. We're spending $1,000 a month on just billing software, and then our EHR software, and then this and that, and it's just the overhead got very, very high. And part of it was just being this mid-sized practice that there was sort of this everted pyramid where you're at the bottom, because I saw 95% of the patients. So everything depends on me working hard to see patients to support all these people and all these expenses, and that's where the math doesn't work out very well. So if I was to go back and do this again, I would start really small. I would be cash only. I would never even talk to insurance companies. I found myself unequally yoked with them because I had one clear goal, and that's my patients would get better. Now, patients sometimes see us as money-hungry pigs. Now, I said early on, there's a whole list of motives for opening your own practice, and if you want to do it to make money, there's no problem with that. But clearly, I was not in it to make money. I took a big salary cut to do this, and I was just devoted to headache patients, trying to help them get better. But the insurance companies do have one, and when I met with some insurance companies executives, they told me in their office their number one priority was their stockholders and their profits, and they said they got to keep their profits up. And so you're unequally yoked. You're going in this direction. You want to do everything you can to help patients get better. Insurance companies want to do everything they can not to pay you and not to get good care for their patients. That's not really what they're interested in. They'll say it's what they're interested in because it's part of their facade of marketing, but it's not really what they're interested in. So I'm going to close now. And if you have personal questions about opening a medical practice, I'd be happy to answer them in my experience. You can send an email if you want to Michael, PRHC, Pacific Rim Headache Center, PRHC@gmail.com, and ask me questions. I'd be happy to answer them. And once again, I'm really glad I did this, but also I feel a little grief about closing my practice. It was on the beach. It was a gorgeous office. It was wonderful patients. I mean, really, I had a great time with that. But to me, my quality of life had crumbled to the point that all I was doing was running this practice, and I had no personal life. So I'll talk to you later if you have any other questions. But I hope you have great success if you decide to follow this path. So cheers to you and to my last 2 nights here in my cave in Malta until my wife arrives. Good night.